Hello, my writer friends. Welcome to Write with Intent. I'm Mindee Arnett, sci-fi and fantasy author, bringing you all the tips, tricks, and tools of the trade that I've learned on my publication journey to help you along with yours. Today, we're going to be talking about what it really means to show and not tell. So let's get started. If you've ever taken a writing class, I promise you have heard the expression, show, don't tell. It's so common that it's actually a cliche, and it's the kind of thing that we tell beginning writers all the time. And ironically enough, we don't actually ever explain what it means, or at least in my career, I've never had anyone truly actually sit me down and explain what the expression show don't tell means in terms of my writing. So I spent a long time just trying to kind of figure that out myself and kind of having this vague notion of it until very recently, when I finally feel like I had a click moment and it all started to make sense, and I want to share that with you today in case you are struggling in the same way that I struggled for years on this particular writing rule, for lack of a better word, because of course there are no rules in writing. So show don't tell is what it sounds like, right? So instead of telling the reader something, you are supposed to show the reader something instead. It's kind of like if you're watching a movie, if you have a voiceover, you are telling the audience something.
Every school has an obligatory psychotic jackass. He's ours.
Whereas you could have a beginning of a scene where instead you show them that same thing without using any words. So for the longest time, because I write science fiction and fantasy, I thought that show don't tell referred specifically to information dumping, or what we'd call the information dump, which of course you were supposed to avoid because it's telling and not showing. So I struggled with this for a long time, and so I would try to pass information to the reader that they needed to know about the world, especially because we're talking about fantasy here where, dragons are coming out of the earth and magic is shooting out of their hands and all kinds of crazy things are happening that I felt the reader needed to know in order to understand the story. And so you have this imperative need to pass information to the reader, but then you have these rules in the back of your head saying, oh no, don't tell them, show them. And so you spend a lot of time struggling with, what am I allowed to say and what's okay and what isn't? And I struggle with this forever. And actually, it's something that I've seen a lot in manuscripts that I have read for up-and-coming writers or people that are needing a critique, where they obviously have felt the same way, where they weren't allowed to pass information directly to the reader. And so they were going through all these very extravagant ways to try and convey what was happening in the world without actually telling anybody. And for me, what happens when a writer tries to do that is that I get bored or confused and just kind of want to bail out.
You cool, man? Like how? Okay.
And the reason why that is because show don't tell actually doesn't apply to quote unquote information. Now you do, of course, or let me refine that. Show don't tell is not the same as information dumping. They're actually two different problems and not related at all, because you do actually need to give your reader information, and it is best to give it to them straight up without any frills and whistles. Just explain in a sentence what they need to know when we're talking about a difficult concept or something that's unique to your world. Perfectly fine to do. That is not actually telling. It is information relaying that helps you build the story. And actually, if you try to not tell them, you're going to make them either confused or bored or frustrated, or they're going to feel disconnected from the story. So it's okay to use that information. Now, you don't want to just dump it. You don't want to and by dumping, you don't want to give them paragraph long chunks of information of just, this is how the world works. You do want to break it up so that it's not a big pile of information, but you kind of just parse it out in easily digestible, interesting ways. So, you have a dialogue where a character is talking about something, and then when you add the tag to the dialogue, you add a clarifying sentence for whatever it was. Let's say that the character is using some strange weapon that you've never seen before, and it has a really cool name, like the Benanthium stick, that whatever. And, we read this really strange word and the reader's going, I have no idea what this is. So what you would do is you would add at the end of the dialogue, you would say, the man said as he held the weapon aloft. And so that little bit of clarifying information tells the reader what they need to know about this strange word. So that's kind of the difference there. So while that might explain the information dumping problem, I hope a little bit, we can go into that maybe in a later vlog, it doesn't really address the show don't tell issue. So the difference is about the level of engagement you're using when you're conveying the story itself. So just say that the man walked into the room and sat down and stared out the window is actually just telling, right? I mean, we're just telling what happened. Here's a list of facts. The man came in, he sat down, he stared out the window. So, and that is a perfectly fine sentence. But if the whole story was like that, it would be really, really boring, right? There'd be no experience for the reader. You'd be like reading a manuscript for a movie, you know, that's describing the actor's actions and not what they're saying so much. So, and it's really boring and it doesn't keep the reader engaged. So the show is actually using details and slowing down some of that action with things that make the story come alive and that immerse the reader into the story. So immersion is kind of the big key there and the difference between show and don't tell. So it could be that you say the man walked into the room and looked around at all the trinkets on the desk, feeling an ache in his stomach at the sight of how much dust there was on them. And then he moved to the sofa which also had a layer of dust and, you know, marks where the cats and the dogs had, you know, chewed it years ago. And then he sat down and stared out the window covered in grime. So while not a really great paragraph, forgive me, I'm not really good at just writing off the top of my head without a computer in front of me.
We need a plan of attack. I have a plan. Attack.
You can see the difference there, right? So the difference is that you're in the one hand you're just being told what's happening, on the other hand you're kind of experiencing what's happening and you're getting little clues about the man's state of being at the same time. So we're knowing that he's sad because whatever house this is has been neglected. The dust has been allowed to sit up. Obviously he knows some history about the chair because he knows that the animals have done some of the damage here. And we know that he's looking out the window again. We get the same idea that the window is dirty, so nobody is caring for this place. And the fact that he has this feeling in his gut, we know that there's some sadness there, some regret or something. So these are all things that are showing the reader what's happening without telling them. So I could have instead said, the man walked in and saw how dirty it was and it made him sad. And then he sat down and looked out the window, which was also dirty, which made him more sad. See what I'm saying? Difference between the show and the don't tell. Now, if you already knew that, which I'm assuming you probably did to some extent, or at least I did know it on an unconscious level, like not on a level that I would have been able to articulate, but you do kind of realize that as a writer, the more you've done, the more you've read, you kind of get a sense of it. So, but some other things to think about when we're talking about show don't tell is that sometimes it is okay to tell, especially if you were describing action or activity that's not particularly important to the story. So, you know, granted, you should try and cut out anything that's not particularly important, but so much showing will slow the action down. So it is okay to occasionally just let it be telling what happened in little spits and spats and kind of deciding when you want things to slow down and be immersive and when you want things to speed up so that the story is still moving forward. That is a creative choice and something that will come just from practicing and doing it. Now, I also want to give you one cool trick about showing, not telling, before I go, that I had learned from Larry Brooks in his story engineering book that I've mentioned earlier. It's really valuable and it's a lot of fun. I don't think that he came up with this. I think it's actually a screenwriting tool and you may have already heard of it in some other case, but anyways, that's where I found out it. And he does what's basically called a character grid. And so I'm going to show it up on the screen here now. You have two columns. On the one column you have a fact about the character. So, and the example that Larry gives in his book is that you have a character that is very stingy or very frugal and doesn't want to spend a lot of money. So you have this character detail. Well, and then you have a second column where you identify how you're going to let the audience know that the character is very stingy or very, frugal without telling them that the person was frugal. And the example he gives is that frugal character who washes paper plates. So he's going to have a scene in his story where you have a character that came home from dinner, ate dinner, and is picking up paper plates, and rather than throwing away, is taking the time to actually clean them and put them back. So you can convey through that action a detail about the character without actually having to tell the audience. So it is a super fun tool. I use it as much as I can, although probably not as much as I should, which you can say is true of everything in my life, maybe yours too. But it's a really cool idea. It's a way to start thinking about the different levels of show don't tell, that it's not always just about information. It's not always just about here to there. It's sometimes about, details about the character or things about the story that are clues that you want the reader to pick up on without actually having to tell them. All right. Well, this one was quick and dirty, hopefully helpful. Post down in the comments if you have any comments or if you have more topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember, the key to success is to write with intent, live your life with intent, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.